Again, I'm Sharon Flynt. I'm the horticulture agent at Scott County here in Georgetown, Kentucky, and I'm coming to you from the Scott County Cooperative Extension kitchen because today I have incorporated the little table that had the mirror on it that family and consumer science agents would use to demonstrate a recipe or something. I've sort of rigged that up for our Kokedama demonstration today. And I was telling Amy earlier, I have really stretched my technical abilities today. So please forgive me if things don't go as it should, but we'll just go ahead and get started. The Japanese art of Kokedama. Now it is pronounced Kokedama, Kokedama, all right? And traditionally, it is a form of Japanese bonsai, okay? Now, with what we will be doing today, I have a feeling it's probably not quite the traditional form, but it's been adapted, and hopefully you'll be able to grow something that you're proud of and looks very nice. Because the idea behind Kokedama is transforming the plant into sculptural art, something that looks aesthetically pleasing. Now, loosely translated, the koki means moss, and the dama means ball. So that's exactly what we're making today. We're making a moss ball, and it will have a plant stuck on the inside of it. Now, I do have to remind you, and the Japanese do this very well. Well, I think they do. I am going to embrace this for all I'm worth today. It's called wabi sabi, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but I am embracing wabi sabi today as I present this because wabi sabi means it's a philosophy that means nothing lasts. Nothing is finished and nothing is perfect. So I'm sort of clinging to that nothing is perfect today so that any mistakes that are made or any glitches that we have, we're just going to embrace it and say, oh, well, meant to be kind of thing. And it does release a lot of pressure sometimes or stress that we put on ourselves. Okay, so essentially, we're going to wrap the plant's root system in a special soil. And then we're going to wrap some moss around that special soil. And then we're going to bind it with string or something similar. Now, this is your handout for materials needed. I think it may have said directions, but actually it's not really directions. This presentation are the directions. And this is the handout that you have is really more of the materials that you will need for Kokedama. Okay, so you will need some sphagnum sheet moss, and you'll want that moistened. You can find sphagnum sheet moss. The last I bought for one class and left over for this class was actually some that you can find in the pet section. Evidently, they use it to line terrestrial aquariums, like for lizards or turtles or something like that. But you should also be able to find it in the floral section of your big box store or anything, but it's just essentially a sheet of moss. For those of you who maybe live in the country and have some woods that you can gain access to that, the landowner doesn't mind, or maybe you own them, so you could possibly harvest your own moss if you would like to. But we bought ours for today. You're also going to need some scissors. We'll need water, florist wire, florist pins, or similar. These are optional, and I will go into more about those things later on. And also gloves, and those are optional. And you'll see later on that I generally am not a gloves person, and my hands show that. But anyway. Now, if we were going to make, and I have several examples today. I have a fern, I have a jade plant, which is a succulent, and I have even, I forget the name of this one, but it is a succulent, one of the, I think it's in the sedum family. So those probably need a little drier soil or can tolerate a little drier soil. Now my fern that I have, it's like a wire fern, and it will need a more moist soil. So when you're thinking about your soil mix and what to put together, you need to consider what type of plant you're going to use. So for my fern, I use 1 part of Akadama, which is actually bonsai soil. Now you may be able to find these in your local, garden centers or local home improvement stores, things like that. I actually bought this online, good old Amazon, to help me just get it here without muss or fuss. And also, you'll need 1 part of potting mix. And this is just any potting mix that you may see at the store. I have learned through trial and error that I get potting mix that has some of those water saving little gel type of things in there that will help conserve some moisture, because I'm not the best waterer of these things. And they will take probably a lot more consideration in your mind when you think about watering. You can't really just leave this on its own for very long. And then you're going to need 1 part of peat moss. Now, this is not the sheet moss that we had, but this is a peat moss, an additive that we're going to put in our mix, and that should be wetted. Okay, so you need to mix it with water. Now, if you were going to do succulents, you could use the Akadama, the bonsai soil. And, at first I made these without the bonsai soil, and then I've started using it because I have found that my soil ball holds together a little better with this bonsai soil. It also aerates the soil very well, which is probably important because you have these sort of squeezed together and in this little moss ball. And then also there's an ingredient in it. I don't know if it's a clay. I know they have expanded shell in this formulation that I have, but it may be a type of clay or something. It helps to hold the mixture together a little better. Okay. So now for the dry succulents, you're going to want to find succulent or cacti mix, but you still want to go ahead and add wetted peat moss. Okay. Now on these, I say 1 part. So it's a 1 to 1 ratio of all 3 of these mixes or these medias. And you can really do whatever size you want to. Today, I think for some of the things I made, and I'll tell you what I made, I think I've made at least two kokedamas from this, and I still have some left over, but I used 2 parts. So like 2 cups of bonsai soil, 2 cups of potting mix, and 2 cups of peat moss, and then I added water to the peat moss to wet it down. Okay. Now, also, you will need your twine or something to bind it together to hold the moss and the ball all together. So you can either choose from column 1, which is like twine. It can be jute, polyester, waxed. You will see this twine on the outside of your ball once you get it completed. I've come to know that I like the waxed twine a lot better. I've used jute and that sort of thing before, and it will eventually break down. And it seems like the unwaxed breaks down a lot quicker than the waxed. However, I have also found that even though it breaks down, it my ball still holds together for the most part over time. So, but you may just know that, if you keep it that long, and like I said, I've killed a few of these, that you will maybe have to restring it or something just to keep it all together and to make it look good and make sure that you can hang it up if you'd like. Or you can also use fishing monofilament. You want to use a 12-pound test or larger, and 12-pound means you could catch a 12-pound fish on there. And so the bigger the poundage, the stronger the fishing line will be. So you will want to use that. And also, when you use fishing line or something similar to that, it's relatively invisible on your moss ball. So it's really an aesthetic thing, how you decide you want your moss ball to look like. Okay, to get started, you can see we have the sheet moss here. Now in the picture on the lower right hand, that is the sheet moss, and that is actually turned upside down. The green mossy side is on the bottom, and what you're seeing there, it will be the inside of your moss ball. Okay, that's like where the roots and where it connects to the ground. So you want to wet it down. I've got mine, I wetted this big large piece that I actually have made several little balls out of, but I tend to go a little smaller sometimes. But I actually was able to get all of that in a large mixing bowl there that you see. But you want to wet it down until it's damp, and make sure it's damp all the way through. Sometimes the bottom, the outside or the green part will be nice and damp, but this little bottom layer here, you might have to soak it a little bit longer and maybe squeeze it a little bit to get some moisture through there. So once you get that done, you can rinse it out. You just squeeze it out like you would a t-shirt or something. And then you want to set that aside. Now for our planting mix, I know we talked about that, but for today's, we had the 1 part potting mix with the water retaining qualities, the bonsai mix, and the peat moss. Now for size wise, 3 cups, say if you took 1 cup of each of those, it will make an average size ball about 4 to 6 inches, maybe a little bit bigger, or it could make 2 smaller ones than that, maybe 3 to 4 inches. You know, you just have to sort of play with it. And then if you make 6 cups, you'll get, you know, of course, double your size. You'll get 2, maybe 4 to 6 inches in diameter balls. But that's a good way to just sort of gauge it. But everybody's will probably be a little different. And remember, we're embracing wabi sabi. We're not going to stress over it. Okay. Now, I'm going to attempt to play a video here. Here's our little setting. If you all will, I'm going to stop this share, but then I'm going to share another. So let's cross our fingers and make sure everything's okay. Here we go. And I apologize for the quality. I am still learning how to make these things come about. So now that you're seeing right there, that is the bonsai soil. See how it's very porous. That is my garden mix that I've added. And those little cups there that you see are 1 cups. Now that is the peat moss, 1 part of the peat moss. And to that, I added a little bit of water and let it set. So here you see I'm mixing it up. You can see I don't have my gloves on, which is why I never keep a nice manicure. And when I do go to get a manicure, they always sort of laugh that I want my nails very short. But, you know, I love to garden. Now you can add a little water as needed. And this will show you the texture. Well, actually the mix to put together there. Now I'm kneading it sort of like if you were making bread, and you just want to come from the bottom and flip it over and just try to make sure that every part of your potting soil mixture is equally distributed. Once you have that, you can pull it out. Now that's about the size of a small orange. Or yeah, so there it is, a rounded little ball, and that you can set that aside now. Now for your soil ball, there are 2 different methods, and there's probably as many methods as there are people. This is the method that I have found I liked best, and I'll explain as I go on why. But I had that ball. Now you want to take that ball and divide it in half, and you can sort of take your thumbs on either side and just sort of pull it apart, and it should hold together. Now, if it doesn't hold together, you can always add a little more of your dry potting mix back into your container where you're mixing. Mix up some more, try that, so just, take your time, figure out what works for you. I know the very first time I taught this, a lot of folks were uh, upset, or, just frustrated is the better word, that, their mix wasn't holding together and everything. But really all it means is that you need to add a little more mix and maybe a little more water, and just work with it until you get a ball that fairly holds together. So here we have our two halves. Now on here, I am actually, in these pictures, I'm using a jade plant that my grandson and he is almost 3, and we picked these up off the floor of a giant jade plant I had, and some of them had roots. So we took them out to the greenhouse and actually planted them in some potting mix. I dusted them with a little bit of root hormone, and they have just come right on. So they're perfect. This was about, maybe a month and a half ago. So they were perfect for this demonstration. So you will see, you don't really see the roots in here, but I will discuss how to take a plant out of a pot later, okay? But with our jade plant, I just picked some out of my little pot over there. And on one half of the ball there, I placed one little jade plant. Now, you can go with one plant, but I thought, we want to make a good show. So I actually added a couple of more plants in there. You sort of have to practice with this because it can be a handful depending on how big you make your balls. And I think that's probably why I make my moss balls a little smaller, just so I can hold them. I have better control in my hand. So I added all of that. And so remember, these plants are sort of pressed in on the bottom half of the ball. Now I take that other half and I put it over the top of those plants and squeeze it together. But then again, and normally I will dip back into the soil mix that you have and grab a little bit more and sort of place it around the root ball. Makes it a little bit thicker, which is good for the roots. And also it helps to hold things together. You want to make sure that all of your roots are contained in that soil ball. You don't want any sticking out. Now, some people will make their soil ball. And like I said, I used to teach it this way, but I found the halves work a little better if you can deal with them. Sort of, sometimes they will crumble on you a little easier. But take your soil ball, and in here, I have my gloves on, but you poke a hole in the top of it. Hold it with both hands and press a thumb into the top, and this makes a hole for your plant's roots. Now here you can see this is actually a plant, an ivy plant that came out of, like a 4-inch pot, I believe it was. And so if you have a bigger plant, or if you're going along and maybe dividing some of your house plants and thinking this would make a great Kokedama that maybe I could give away, these make great garden gifts or gardener gifts. You can divide those and, go ahead and divide those now. But what you want to do is essentially just about shake all of the soil, or gently remove a lot of the soil. You want to be able to see those roots. You can see in that second picture, you can see the little roots sticking out and the nicely formed little ball. Now, once you have removed all of the roots, then it says slip the roots into the hole and gently pack the ball around them. But what I have found is a lot of times for me, it's not that simple. You have all these roots sticking up, and I always feel like I'm jamming them, like jamming a foot into a too small shoe. So I feel like the roots get sort of crumpled and folded over. But you know, whatever's easiest, if this is easier for you, and a lot for beginners, sometimes this ball with the hole poked in the top is the easiest way to do it. But you want to make sure that you've got all of those roots in there. And again, if you need to, you can always add a little more soil around to it. Now for the wrap, you will take that moss that you have wetted and have had waiting on the sidelines. You want to lay it out onto your table. You start to wrap the moss around the ball. Now you don't have to cut your moss into a circle or anything. It's going to come to you in irregular shapes. And sometimes you may have to use pieces. And what I have found is that sometimes pieces are better in putting this together than if you had one big sheet of moss, because you sort of have to fold it over and pull some moss out, because you really only want one layer of your sheet moss around the ball. So here you can see that placing the ball inside the moss, and then you can see that hands over here on the second picture, they're sort of placing that around. Now down here it says florist pins, florist wire may help. And what I have found is that it helps a lot, especially when, you know, this is your first attempt to do this. However, if you do not have florist pins or florist wire, I will tell you, I have taken paper clips and unbent them and made little pins or like little staples out of them and stuck them in there. And really what you're doing, you only need something to sort of help hold the moss that you've already shaped around the ball while you move to another side of it to get your little moss ball totally covered. Okay, and then now here's the twine, that wax twine. You can see that they're starting. You want to start at the bottom, leaving a longer piece of string exposed to tie it off, and a lot longer if you think you want to make this into a hanging kokedama. And let's see, here we go. I'm going to try to flip back to or unshare. Here I've got part of this already made. This is a moss ball. Now this is a lot larger, okay? And then this is a little succulent, and poor guy's, he's been through it. I've had him ready for a couple of days, so he's not looking too good right now. But since this is one of those rosette succulents, I'll hold this where you can see it. Generally their leaves go all the way down to the soil line. But if you're going to use one of these, a rosette type succulent for a kokedama, you probably want to remove some of those leaves there so you have a little bit of stem. That won't hurt it at all. And actually you can take those other leaves and start new plants with it. But this is generally what this looks like. Now this was like a 4-inch potted plant that I bought locally. And you can see that I've removed all of that soil, and all you see are these little roots, okay? And that is good. Now I have my ball prepared, and I'm placing, you know, I would have done that, you know, ahead of time, but I sort of made him like this just so I could bring parts of him out and show you how it works. Now this is the wax twine. Like I said, I prefer it. And you want to start with a large amount, see all this excess, and then place your kokedama moss ball right there. Now this will be your tag end. Now I think that's probably a little more than what I really needed, but I'm going to leave this attached for now. I made the mistake of trying to cut a certain amount, you know, to twine one time, and then I ran out of twine, and then you have to piece it. So I've learned that I take my twine and sort of leave it attached for a while until I get going. So you have this on either side. You can see, I hope you can see this. Hope my hands aren't in the way. And then with this piece, we're going to start to wrap. Now there are many different ways to wrap, but what you want to do when you start off is to make sure that the opposite piece, the piece you're using to wrap, you want to go under your moss ball and cross over your little tie-in that you have. Whoop. And this gets complicated. or it looks complicated, it's really not. But you want to go under that and capture it where it covers, it goes across your tie end. Okay. Said I've got a mess here. Now, some folks are able to do this and make nice patterns and symmetrical lines on their moss ball. I always feel like once I get to this point, I'm just sort of panicking and trying to get it all put together so that it won't fall apart. But you start wrapping. Now you can wrap around your ball, but you just don't want your twine wrapped, you know, like around the middle of your ball. You want your twine to be wrapped around, but then also up and down, sideways, that sort of thing, just to make sure that you hold your moss. So here, put that down. And here you see, I'm working with it. I'm going to go ahead now that I've got it started and pull out some more string. Use my little clippers here. So now I'm going to take this and just continue to wrap it. And don't forget to occasionally come up to the top and go over the top where the plant is, but then also take it around at different angles. Also look at your ball and see if you have any places where moss is falling off, or if you have a bare spot, like right here, could be considered a little bare spot, and you know, that's just a little scrap that fell off, and place it there and then continue to wrap. So it's almost like wrapping a package, except it's a round package that you're trying every way in the world to make sure that it's contained. Now, once you have it contained, if I were going to hang this, I would make sure that both of my strings at the bottom, I would tie those together to make sure they're nice and taut. And actually, I'm going to tie it in a little knot. Okay, and then you bring the strings up from there. Now, if you want to get fancy, you could add a third string, you know, and maybe do 3 strings, or maybe another string that you have that go underneath of it, and so you'll have 4 strings coming up. This is a little big, okay, but that's essentially how you wrap it up. I like, now this is one I created the other day, and I just have the 2 strings that come up out of the middle, and then I actually cut it down so I could show you all this. But here it is coming up through the middle, and that could hang down like that. Or you can place, I've got this little copper pan here. I put pebbles in the bottom of it. I don't know if you can see that. Put a little water in there for them, and then you can place them in there. Now, this is my little wire fern. Now, I did do this one just the other day. And because I really made sure that I got a lot of the soil and broke a few roots, a little bit afterwards, especially with like ferns and things like that, you may see a little bit of dieback or something, but that's natural. You know, you've really sort of taken every bit of soil away from their roots, and then you've stuffed them into this little smaller ball, or well, maybe not a smaller ball, but you know, a small hole or something like that. So you may have damaged the roots a little, but just allow it to be like that. Let it go for a while, and then once you start to see it start flourishing again, you can sort of cut back some of these dead pieces. But for now, I would leave those. There's the side. Actually, I can lift it up a little closer too. So you can see, and like I said, some people make this into a nice art, everything symmetrical. I'm not that. I sort of really strongly embrace that wabi-sabi there. So, but actually once you get this going, and over time, it almost seems like your twine sort of fades. Now, if you used an untreated twine, it will degrade and, you know, sort of fall apart. But like I said, it seems like your moss ball will sort of hold together. But if you feel like it's degraded a little bit, you know, you can always restring it at some time. Okay. Now this one, I actually did get some sort of a little pattern. I don't know if you can see that, but it almost looks like a little pineapple pattern going across there. Unintentional, but just sort of left out there. But you can, if you put enough thought to it, you can actually, I've seen several patterns, you know, like diamond shaped patterns go across it, or like pumpkin, you know, like the division in a pumpkin, all of those types of things. Now for display, you can see that one hanging up. That was not actually mine, but you can see that it is, it looks like maybe one. That may be one of my pictures. That may be one. So you can see that it's hanging up on the right there. I've got sort of an stylized picture. You know, you can make a little vignette with your other plants. Now, care. Really, they're pretty easy to care for. Now, this is someone who has actually forgotten about hers and, you know, went on Christmas vacation and came back to the office and it was nice and dry. So, but they are really rather easy to care for if you have them, you know, right where you will see them day in and day out. They will need some light to thrive, but it really depends on your plant. Now, you know, you can get plants that, if you're going to keep it inside, you can get plants that will, you know, don't need a lot of sunlight to thrive. There are several house plants like that that you can find. But really, it depends on the type of plant you use. So when you're picking out your plant, you need to consider, where's this going to go? Am I going to water it consistently, say like for a fern, or even I've even put some like little pansies in these early in the spring before, and they're really pretty. Of course, I don't have a picture of it to show you. I should have. I forgot all about that. But anyway, so it just depends on the plant. Now, if you've got a succulent, of course, you may not need to water it as often, and that sort of thing. If you've got a mother-in-law's tongue plant, you may not need as much light. So it just, again, it depends on your plant. But the things to remember is that the plant is moss-based, or your container for holding this plant is moss-based. And so it's very porous, and your plant is likely to dry out quicker no matter where you place it, but especially if you have a plant that needs direct sunlight, it's going to dry out a lot quicker. So you need to make sure that you check it. You can extend the life of your Kokedama by picking a semi-shady spot in your home and just keep a close eye on it. If the plant needs direct sunlight, after you have pruned these roots and twined and it's in this totally new home for it, you want to leave it set somewhere where it's not going to be exposed to direct sunlight for, say, a couple of days to a week, because this will give it time to acclimate. And then once, you know, after a week or so, then you can start moving it toward the sunlight. Really, essentially, it's just like you're hardening off you know, your Kokedama, just like you would transplants that you're planting outside. You need to just acclimate them to a new type of environment. The best way to determine if your plant needs water, and this is so easy for those of you who's like, I never know when to water or whatever, you pick up your moss ball. Because you've handled it so much now, you'll know the heft to it, and everything is fully moisture for the most part while you're making it. So you know it has the certain weight that it has. So from time to time, pick up your moss ball, and if it feels light, then that's a clue. You need to go ahead and water it. And the way you water these is that you actually soak them, okay? You would fill a bowl or a container. I've even set several in a sink and put some room temperature water in there. You don't want to you don't want it to come all the way up to the neck of the plant, but set them in depending on the size of your bowl, or if it's in a sink, you want like 2 or 3 inches of water in there, and then allow them to soak in there, maybe for 5 to 10 minutes. But just check it. There's no hard and fast rules on this. And the way you check it is you just go in there and you pick them up. And when they start to feel heavy again, and have a little bit of that heft to them that you remember when you first created it, then you can say it's probably watered. It's had enough water. Now you will need to, don't set your moss ball on any kind of wooden surfaces or any surfaces that you don't want, water damage, or even some of the little moss pieces falling off, because that will happen. And especially after you've soaked them, you want to place them somewhere. A colander will work, or plates, things like that. I've even put them on like a countertop with some paper towel underneath of them, and just let some of that water drain out for a while. And then once it's not dripping anymore, then you can go and place it back where you had it. Remember, do not set them on wood or anything that you wouldn't want damaged with watermarks, without maybe putting a saucer, or I think you saw in some of the live shots that I have little containers, little ceramic containers and that sort of thing that you can put them in. And I really like them when they're set in little bowls or stoneware or something like that. Okay, troubleshooting. The humidity and temperature inside your home, or even out on your garden. Say if you've got some of these hanging on a shady side of your porch or deck or something, that will determine how often you're going to need to water. If you start to see brown tip leaves, that can indicate that it's drying out and you want to water it more often, depending on what type of plants you have in there. Say, I had some spider plants that I put in one, and they got a little tip burn on it, and that was because I had used some what I call city water on them with some of the chemicals in it, and that does happen, and you'll get tip burn that way. So if your otherwise healthy, well-watered plant starts to show some signs of stress, it may mean that you need to create a larger ball for it or repot it somewhere. Two indications that you've overwatered. Say you get overzealous and you say, I'm going to soak this thing as long as I can, and do it constantly. You'll start to see your leaves yellowing, and you may even see the presence of mold. And I've actually seen this before on some of the Kokedama balls, where they were just kept too moist. Plus they were in a place maybe with really low light, but they did not have air circulation. So if you have something that needs low light and it also needs moisture, you really want to make sure that it has some air circulation around it, because this will help to stave off the mold. If you find mold on your moss, you can trim your infected leaves, and then you sort of rinse it off with a warm soaked towel or something like that. However, really try to not let it go to mold, because you just never, once that happens, sometimes it's really hard to go back the other way. And then again, I've said, put it in a shallow dish or a ceramic bowl or stoneware, something like that, to protect your surfaces. Now, once a month, you can fertilize your plant, and any water-soluble indoor plant fertilizer that you can find. Water-soluble, of course, is the key word there. Only use about half of the recommendation that it says for your moss ball. So, if it says use 1 capful per cup of water, I would, cut that by half. Use 1 capful for 2 cups of water, or even you can cut it even a little bit more, just sort of feel your way around it, because you will be watering this constantly. And so every month or so, that little bit of fertilizer will help maybe keep it living, well, healthy. That is the end of my presentation. I'm glad to take any questions that we have.